Working drawing called a cartoon. It's the same size as the fresco that resulted from it. Placed against a wet plaster wall, the artist outlined the drawing with a sharp tool, which caused creasing and tearing and staining.
I think it is both one of the most important drawings bought during Philippe's long tenure as director, and at the same time, not being a restorer, I think I could fairly say one of the most challenging in terms of its condition.
George and I agree upon how much conservation should be done on a work of art. We never want anything to look new. We want the signs of age to be present. We want to remove things that have nothing to do with the artist's work on the object.
We had to balance the fact that it would never be in perfect condition with the importance and beauty and character of the drawing.
This is the condition of the drawing when it was, in fact, at the auction house. And you could see all the repairs. There's the long one where the drawing was actually had broken across the center, lots of patches, the yellow staining, the repairs on the side. And what was interesting in this case, the condition was the result of people trying to save it and preserve it. It wasn't because of adverse climate conditions. Conservation of works on paper is a very slow process, and it's often best not to keep very close track of the time. This drawing
This drawing is a 16th century study by Bernard van Orley for a tapestry in a series that was later lost in a fire.
This is a very early example of the use of watercolor, and it's quite beautiful, and the watercolor itself is beautifully preserved. The colors are very bright.
This drawing came up in 1995 at Sotheby's, and it was one of a pair of elaborate, complicated drawings for tapestries showing the princes of Nassau with their wives.
George and I and Philippe went to Sotheby's together, and I was telling Philippe that I really wasn't certain about the dark brown ink.
This one had a big stain on it, as I remember.
This photograph from the auction catalog shows the drawing in its damaged condition, spotted with mold and large brown ink stains.
But as it turned out, there was a means of reducing the ink because the paper had a gelatin sizing on it, and this created a barrier. So that luck was in our favor.
Shockingly, one technique that's sometimes used to remove stains from paper is total immersion in water, even New York City tap water.
This, of course, I emphasize, is not done with the vast majority of drawings because they are not all as stable. There's no room for error. You have to be extremely careful. This print has been tested and the colors are stable, but as I rotate the pen, you could see the water has already begun to turn yellow, and that's because the acidic components in the paper are beginning to dissolve. And this treatment will be repeated several times until all the yellowing has come out.
Fragile as glass is almost an understatement when describing pieces that are restored in the Met's Stained Glass Conservation Studio, the only such facility in any museum in the United States. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has the second largest stained glass collection in the world. Conservators here are repairing a piece of American stained glass from the 1860s from St. Anne's Church in Brooklyn in preparation for installation in the Met's American wing.
It has been damaged through deterioration of the glass on the surface. A separate piece of glass will be placed behind the original to sort of recreate the darker tones and bring the form of the face back together for the viewer without actually intruding on the original. So it's a totally reversible process which in no way affects the original work.
Even works of stone or metal can be fragile.
And what you see here,
in the Objects Conservation Lab, conservators use X-rays to reveal a wealth of information about the works of art they handle.
We often use X-rays as a tool to look at damages, areas of restoration. problems with an original casting or original carving or something, weak areas on a sculpture, cracks that may not be visible on the surface that could lead to catastrophic results down the road. So X-rays are a very useful tool for us.
The elemental composition of a particular metal will tell you from which part of the world it came from. If you thought it was from the Aegean, you suddenly discover it is from Upper Egypt. You also learn by examining the objects how they were made, and how they were made also tells you a great deal about the creative process and the origins of the object.
These are 3 objects that are coming in, 3 ceramic vessels from the Islamic collection.
Sometimes conservators must measure what they can do against what they should do.
We have recreated the shape of the bowl. We have continued the pattern along the edge so that it sort of unites the shape. But we haven't gone so far as to recreate the figures because we don't have enough information for that. So in that case, we've created the background. Each object is sort of its own set of compromises. Throughout history, sometimes things have been overly restored, so that often the work tells you more about the restorer than it does about the original artist, and that's what we try to avoid. I mean, we don't want people to go into the galleries and admire our restoration or admire our conservation. We want them, ideally, not to have no idea that it even happened.
Ironically, the point of some restoration work is to be obvious.
Well, this is part of an Egyptian sculpture from the Amarna period. And the curator who works with this material believes that the hand that you see there and the part from the wrist and the lower part of the forearm belong together. So what Anne is doing now is she's joined those 2 pieces together, and she's now has made a plaster fill to fill the gap where that loss is. But it will probably be done in such a way that it is obvious that the area that she is creating is not original, that it is a restoration. So it will be close to the original appearance of the stone, so that you don't focus on the restoration, but it will be discernible as a restoration.
There are times when a work is simply best when left alone. The fractured face of this Egyptian queen is evocative in its natural form.
The astonishing thing about this object is that it is so powerful, so engaging, even though it is a fragment, clearly broken, part of a larger sculpture. To a certain degree, its fragmentary nature may well be part of what makes it so exciting and mysterious.
Director Philippe de Montebello and curator